Freud, Nietzsche, Hobbes, Locke, etc., etc. You can go ahead and if you feel very fluent in those guys, use them. But this is a resource. You have to have one resource, so you have to have one source in your paper. Remember, of course, it is due on Wednesday, Victorian.com at 8 in the morning, and then hard copy at class time for our discussion. Tuesday, we have time writing. Monday, you have whatever you want to do. All right? Okay, so let's get started. There's probably no doubt that Dickens is one of my favorite authors, and really second only to the other author we studied 2 years ago, Victor Hugo. So I started reading Dickens probably when I was about 12 years old. I've read just about everything he's written and really, really enjoy the way he is able to shape the time, the setting, the circumstances, drive the plot through the characters. To me, I mean, Dickens is a master at establishing setting and putting you right into the heart, right into the context of what's going on in London in the setting. I mean, he gives us this great description of the slums, of the prisons, of the schoolhouse, of the courts. I mean, in my mind, there are very few writers who are just as rich and thick with description as Dickens is. And so, I was thinking about this morning. It has either been the best of times or the worst of times. For me, it's been the best of times to be able to walk through two of my favorite texts, Of Course, Like This, and then this one, A Tale of Two Cities, with one of my favorite group of students that I've worked with. So for me, it is, again, a real privilege and honor to be able to kind of walk with you and pick your brains on this text. The thing I like most about Dickens, though, the thing I want to help you guys unpack today, is that Dickens, of course, is, I think, a really great novelist. But Mr. Carter and I were talking about this last night. The fact that he's a novelist is really secondary to what I think his real drive and ambition is. And that is as a social reformer. Dickens is a master at looking at corrupt institutions, looking at unjust systems of oppression, pulling back the veil and saying, we don't have to have these institutions. We can be better than this. We can be more than this. And so throughout his career, throughout his novels, over and over and over again, what Dickens is doing is looking at institutions square in the face and calling it out for what it is. Calling it on the carpet for its savagery, its inhumanity, its cruelty. Because at the heart of Dickens, this guy really believes that England can be better. He really believes that Britain can be more than it is. And this is not somebody who is unaware of the social injustices. Dickens is intimately aware of what goes on in the underbelly of these institutions. He grew up in a prison setting. His dad had collected this large amount of debt, and now today everybody has debt, credit cards and cars and houses and all these things. But then, if you couldn't pay your debt, they would take you and put you in the debtor's prison. And so Dickens grows up in this debtor's prison and has to work in the workhouse to try to help pay off the family debt. And in very squalid, very vicious, cruel, harsh conditions. The boss of the workhouse there is a man by the name of Mr. Fagin. And of course, if you've read Oliver Twist, you recognize that name as one of the villains there. So Dickens is intimately aware of the social circumstances. He's intimately aware of the underbelly of the institutions that govern London at this time. And so in every novel that he writes, in every work that he puts forth, he's really trying to unpack, and he's really trying to critique and ultimately reform those institutions. And so to give us a bit of a handle on where Dickens is situated historically, contextually, I want to walk with you a little bit through the Victorian era. How do we get to the situation we get to in London at the time in which Dickens is writing? And to understand that, you really have to understand that there's a divide that happens, there's a change that happens, really within one generation, within about 50 years. It probably seemed like it was overnight. Between the agricultural, agrarian, rural, pastoral economy and culture and way of life that most people would have understood for hundreds upon hundreds of years, tracing back generationally. The person who grew up in 1305 would have had a lot in common with the person who grew up in 1705. Manor houses, yeoman farmers, wooden implements for agriculture, simple life in rural villages, very pastoral scenes. They would have had a lot in common for hundreds upon hundreds of years. But within a span of just one generation, we moved from that to the Industrial Revolution. And it's a lot like my generation and up. So the adults in the room are living and have lived through two different worlds. The world in which you are really just on the cusp of. We grew up prior to, of course, the internet. And so I can remember when phones were still on walls, and when you wanted to find something out, you dialed 0 for information, or you looked it up in the phone book. When libraries had decimal cards instead of computers everywhere, when you wrote things down instead of typing them into something. But that world really doesn't exist for most of us anymore. For most of us, we cross over into another world, a brave new world, that is just beginning, right? And just accelerating. And that world that I remember and that the adults remember is no longer for most of us here. And most of us, in fact, all of us in some way, are so ingrained into technology, and technology is so rich and thick in our culture and in our society that we could not go back if we wanted to. And that's really a lot of what took place with the Industrial Revolution for people in Victorian England. Queen Victoria comes to the throne in 1834. She just reigns and reigns and reigns and reigns. She has one of the longest reigns of any British monarch. And under her reign, England moves from this agricultural, rural setting to this industrial. Let me read you some words from John Ruskin, a writer at the time, who is looking at this change. And listen to him place in context the difference between what life in England was like before to what it is now. He says, there was no railway then. Fields and farmsteads stood where the Kirkgate station is. Where the 20 black throats of the foundry belch out flame and soot, there were only strawberry grounds and blossoming pear orchards. On the chapel side, there was the soft green English landscape, with woods and spires, and the brown sails of boats silently moving along the flowery banks. On the town side, there were picturesque traffic and life. I can remember how clean the pavement used to look there. The towns are incredibly dirty now. Market day used to be a great event for us all. I wish that you could have seen the handsome farmers' wives ranged around the church walls, with their baskets of apricots and cream cheese before Reform came. You might have seen, too, the pretty cottagers' daughters, with their bunches of lavender and baskets of fruit, or heaps of cowslips and primroses for the wine and vinegar. They were prized in the country around as neat, clean, modest-spoken girls. I do not know where they are gone now. I suppose to the factories. That's the shift that takes place under the reign of Queen Victoria. And so, of course, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, it's powered by the power looms, by the railroads, by the steam engine, and then, of course, ultimately and finally by the factories. And so, as urban life grew and became centered around the factories, you guys have probably studied the Industrial Revolution in some context, I'm sure, whether here or foreign. But as you well know and could imagine, the cities are unprepared for this massive influx of people. Millions and millions of people move from the rural setting into the cities, or the cities, the villages themselves become dominated by factories. Well, what happens when that takes place? What happens when you have people moving from one way of life to another in conditions where you lack sanitation, you lack proper food and water, you lack a police force, you lack education, people are living piled on top of each other in slums, piled on top of each other in tenements. What are the conditions that take place? Well, of course, health deteriorates. 2,000 people a week die from cholera in London during this time. Sexual disease is rampant in London at this time. People die of bronchitis and tuberculosis, all kinds of things that they're breathing in from the belch of the soot and smoke in the factories. So disease is rampant. Of course, crime is rampant, as you can imagine. People living on top of each other, people living crowded into these tenements. Prostitution is rampant. Theft is rampant. Murder is rampant. And the most affected, the most afflicted in all of these during Victorian London, during the Victorian era, is, of course, the most vulnerable, the women and the children. And so over and over again, those who are the recipients of the savage cruelty of the systems are most often those who are least prepared to protect themselves from it. So women are repressed and oppressed and victimized Children, of course, sent to the factories to be worked literally to death, right? Their bodies ground up in these machines. You have the loss of life, literally the loss of limb, and ultimately the loss of humanity, the loss of dignity itself. So this is Victorian England. This is Victorian London as Dickens emerges. And so into this maelstrom of chaos and debauchery and inhumanity and victimization comes Charles Dickens. And what Dickens does again is look right into the heart of the most sacred institutions, Parliament, civil service, the church, education, and he calls them on the carpet and says, you are victimizing, you are oppressing, you are creating this culture of cruelty. But the great, for me, the great thing that Dickens does is he never loses hope in humanity. He always believes, yes, things are savage and cruel now. Yes, things are vicious now. Yes, we have systems that churn out this culture of cruelty. But it doesn't have to stay like this. And through the power of the pen, Dickens is able to do really what the ballots, what Parliament, what the church, what very few other institutions are able to do. And of course you know that Dickens was wildly popular, most popular novelist at his time. People flocked and thronged to get his books, to hear him read, to see him perform his plays. Of course, as we talked about, that was entertainment for the day. We didn't have movies, we didn't have Xboxes, we didn't have smartphones. So people, of course, wanted the thick, rich descriptions that Dickens provided. And what Dickens was able to do with the power of his pen was to pull the veil back and raise the consciousness, raise the awareness of the populace to the very systems and culture that they held most dear. And so, in his writings, when he wants to attack Parliament, when he wants to go after the unjust system of Parliament, he writes Hard Times. When he wants to go after the civil service that's mired in bureaucracy and red tape, he writes Little Dorrit. When he wants to go after a court system that oppresses the innocent, that oppresses in particular women and children, he writes Bleak House. When he is talking about the poor laws that permit fraud and cruelty, he writes Oliver Twist. When he's talking about prisons that create a system of injustice, he writes David Copperfield. When he's writing about an education system that permits a culture of cruelty to children, he writes Nicholas Nickleby. In every novel, you've always got to be thinking, who's he going after? What system is he trying to call out here? And if you read his novels, his villains are really, I think, excellent. They are caricatures. What does that mean? What's that? Yeah, well, in a sense, they are modeled after some. What does the word caricature mean?
It's an exaggeration of certain features.
Yeah, exaggeration. This grotesque exaggeration, right? This funhouse mirror replication of some kind of person or institution. And I would argue that what Dickens does with his characters in each novel, and he gives them great names: Squeers, Fagin, Bumble, Brigg, Grind. He gives them these really great names. You know right away who the villain is, right? But he makes them caricatures of the very institutions themselves that he's trying to go after. So in Nicholas Nickleby, for example, which is, again, one of my favorite books of all time, Nickleby, Squeers in that, is this grotesque caricaturization of this savage, vicious education system. And so if we're in the novel itself, we might think, I would think, that Squeers is this person we would want to get to know, right? It's a person of honor in the culture, of respect, of position in the culture. But as we read it through the eyes of Dickens, we recognize, oh my gosh, this guy is the embodiment of everything that is vicious and cruel and bad and wrong and savage to children in the common education system. And so what Dickens does is, through the villain, through the caricature of the character Waxman Squeers in Nicholas Nickleby, he's able to say, surely, as you identify as a reader, surely you recognize that this character himself is evil. So therefore, surely you recognize that he represents the system itself that is evil. And the brilliance of Dickens, the power of Dickens, is that ultimately he wins. Ultimately, through the power of the pen, Dickens is able to usher in, by raising the consciousness of the populace, He's able to usher in, reform, or abolish altogether the institutions that he's attacking. The unjust court systems, the vicious school system, the poor laws, the prisons. I mean, he's able to help usher some reform and change because of what he's doing. So in every Dickens text, and if you read a Dickens text beyond this one, or you think about ones you may have read before, think of it through the lens of, what is the institution he's trying to go after here? What is the system of inequality or oppression or injustice that he's trying to unmask? And of course, as you recognize as you read Dickens, the victims are always the vulnerable, right? I mean, they're always the orphan, they're always the child, they're always the woman, they're always somebody that we would never want to see chewed up in this manner. And so by identifying with the victim, then, we, of course, hopefully side against the system. And that's really, I think, part of what ushered reform in the late Victorian era, was the power of Dickens to do this. So, how does he do this in A Tale of Two Cities? What is he doing here in this text? He is, of course, writing this about the period just before and including the French Revolution. And so we have a tale of literally two cities, right? The tale of London, the tale of Paris. And let me read for you what, if you have not already read this, I'm hoping you will read this over the weekend. But let me read for you just a few lines from the first chapter. I think in this first chapter, Dickens is saying very loud, very clear, very transparently, this is who I am and what I'm about. This is why I write. This is what I'm trying to do with the pen. Okay? He says this. And again, this is, if not the most popular line, at the top of the most popular lines in the English language. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. It was the year of our Lord, 1775. Right there we see these juxtapositions. Best of times, worst of times. We see this dialectic. We see this tension between times of light, times of darkness, hope, despair. For whom is it the best of times? For whom is it light? For whom is it spring and hope? Well, yeah, the rich, the powerful, the prominent, those in charge of the system, right? And in this novel, we'll see, of course, the aristocracy and the nobility. For whom is it the worst of times? Yeah, the poor, the chewed up, the vulnerable. And we'll see that very clearly displayed. He's talking here about France. Under the guidance of her, France, under the guidance of her Christian pastors, that's key, she entertained herself, besides, with such humane achievements, and there almost should be quotes around that, but with such humane achievements as sentencing a youth to have his hands cut off, his tongue torn out with pincers, and his body burned alive. Okay, let me read that to you again. Listen to how you're always looking at juxtaposition, Dickens. Listen to the juxtaposition. Listen to the dialogue. Listen to the difference here, they say. Under the guidance of her Christian pastors, France, so Christian pastors on one side, France entertained herself. Entertainment is about to be really thrown in our face. France entertained herself with such humane activities. Christian pastors entertained themselves with humane activities as sentencing a youth to have his hands cut off, his tongue torn out with pincers, and his body burned alive. Why? Because he stole? Because he attacked somebody? Because he murdered somebody? Because he committed heinous acts against another person? Why? Because he had not kneeled down in the rain to do honor to a dirty procession of monks which passed within his view at a distance of some 50 or 60 yards. You see what Dickens is doing? He is holding in one hand the idea of an institution we all hold dear, right? Christian pastors, entertaining themselves with the humane achievement of, what's the humane achievement they're entertaining themselves with? Taking a young child, cutting off its hands, pulling out its tongue, and burning its body alive. That's what Dickens is trying to show us. And what he is saying here, of course, he sums up in this line later.
on page 15. He runs through other acts of cruelty. People who are waylaid in the night, mobs who have guns fired upon them, all kinds of vicious cruelty. And then he ends with this line. He says, and nobody thought any of these occurrences much out of the common way. What's the occurrence he just talked about? A child whose hands have been cut off, tongue pulled out, burned alive. Nobody thinks this is much out of the common way. That's the very thing Dickens is going right after. We think this is just the way life is. It's tough, right? It bites, but it's just the way it is. And Dickens won't let us get away with that. He won't let us get away with thinking that. And then he comes back and he says, all these things, and 1,000 like them. I could go on and on and on and give you example after example after example of the very thing I just talked about. He takes one example and puts it before us. This child whose hands have been cut off, tongue pulled out, body burned alive. That's just one of 1,000 I could pull out. All of these things, and 1,000 like him, came to pass in and close upon the dear old year. I love how he juxtaposes those words, right? The dear old year, the celebratory year. This year we all hold as dear and as common. In the dear old year, 1,775. So, as you read A Tale of Two Cities, as you engage with this, think about this. What is it Dickens is going after? Who is it that he's really trying to unmask here? What is the system he's trying to pull back the veil? And who are the victims? And of course we'll see Dr. Manet, imprisoned for 18 years in the North Tower of the Bastille. Why? Because he murdered somebody? Because he stole from somebody? Not even that. He sees a young girl being brutally attacked, raped by a nobleman, speaks out against it, and they want to lock him up and hide him away forever. So much so that his daughter doesn't even know he's alive. Thinks that her dad died. And of course now the opening of this chapter is, the opening of this section, recalled to life. That which was buried, that which was hidden in the darkness, that which was ground up and forgotten, cannot be forgotten under the pen of Dickens. Dickens is going to recall all of us to life. So you're going to have these themes of death and dismay and destruction here, juxtaposed against life and resurrection and this reclaiming a better world over here. Okay? Questions on that? We got 5 minutes. I'll let you get to class. Any questions on that? You're free to use any and all of that. You're free to do some research on that. I really, really am looking forward to what you do with this on Tuesday. So, good weekend. Enjoy your 3 days off. Some of you I will see in a few hours. The rest of you I will see on Tuesday.